Let's talk how I make my music videos and how you can too. So today we're going to go through how I shoot a video, start to finish, and at the end of the video, I'll show you the final product. I'm going to be doing a lot of cutting back and forth between me talking here and footage I took on my iPhone while I was shooting this segment. The first thing you need to consider is your setting. What kind of look are you going for? This will determine the location of your shoot. Now, while location is important, don't let not having access to a great shooting location stop you. You'd be amazed how much you can do with just a little open space and a few lights. For this segment, we're shooting in my driveway. It's not really anything to look at in the daytime, but at night, a few well-placed lights will turn this into a really nice backdrop. Lighting. Now, this could be a subject all on its own, and it is. There's people who their entire job is just setting up and handling lights. Now, even though lighting is a complex subject, I'm going to try to boil it down to just a few things to help you. The first thing to think about is your key light. The key light is the light that's shining on the face of your subject. Right now I have a softbox up there hanging from the ceiling. That's sending a nice diffused light toward my face and lighting most of what you see around me. Softboxes make a great key light, but reflectors work too. Unless you're going for a silhouette look, you need to light your subject from the front, and you can do that a couple of ways. One way is using a softbox, but another way to do that is with a reflector, where you're taking the light from one source and bouncing it back onto your subject. Now that you've thrown some light on your subject's face, the next thing to think about is the backlight. The backlight is also called a hair light because it lights your subject from behind, casting a nice glow in their hair. That really helps to separate them from the background and make them kind of pop. Now for me, I like to use a strong backlight for a lot of subject separation. Once I have my backlight placed, I then go back and set my key light or my reflector wherever it needs to be to throw some light on the subject's face. All the reflector is really a glorified shiny piece of material, and we put the reflector where we want to reflect the light. So in this case, I have the light reflecting back on to the microphone where I'm going to be standing. And this is great because it's like you get another light for free, because we throw all that light that we make with these big bright halogens back on where we need it. Now, speaking of lighting the subject's face, where do you put that light? I like to put it a little bit off to the left or right of the subject. That's called Rembrandt lighting. Rembrandt lighting refers to the way that Rembrandt lit his subjects in his portraits. Really, it's just a fancy way of saying both eyes are lit and one side of the face is lit while the other is kind of in the shadows. It looks a lot better than direct frontal lighting, which kind of makes people look like they're having their mugshot taken. As for which lights to buy, I recommend some LED softboxes. LEDs are great because they don't use a lot of power, and softboxes really just make everybody look good. I use these for key lights all the time, and they really just have a way of making people look good. They're very flattering and very forgiving. Even if you can't afford any other lights, you'd be surprised how much mileage you can get out of a couple of softboxes. The best part is they only cost about $100 for a pair, so if you're going to make videos, just go and get some. Now for backlight, I like to use the sun, but it's not always available. Also, since we're shooting at night, that's not really going to work. So what I have instead are these halogen Fresnel lights. The great thing about these is that they're super bright and they're focusable because they have these lenses in the front. And you probably can't tell from the video, but these things are unbelievably bright. Now there are some things to think about with these because one, they get very hot, and two, they use a lot of power. So you definitely need to be aware of how you're handling these. Also, watch out what you're plugging these into, because most circuits in your house are only 15 amps, and each of these is 6 amps, which is fine if you have 2 of them and nothing else plugged into that circuit. But if you start to plug much else in, then you might be going down to your breaker box. Now when it comes to doing music videos, your audio is always recorded first, because the process for recording audio is completely different than the process for recording video. You need to have your recording so that you can play along to it while you record your video. There are some instances where audio is recorded simultaneously with the video, but those are live performance situations, and that's not really what we're doing here. Now once you have your song recorded, the next thing to do is plug it into some speakers so you can play along to it while you're recording. Later you'll need to sync up the audio from your camera and from your original recording. So although we're not actually going to record audio on this video shoot, we are going to place a microphone stand here to give it the illusion that audio is being captured. That way it's a little less jarring for the viewer when they watch it. Monitoring. I cannot tell you how important it is to keep an eye on what your camera is doing while you're recording. There's all kinds of things you can get wrong, so it's really important to keep checking back and make sure that all your settings are correct. The first thing you want to think about is focus. I usually put something where I'm going to stand, and then I focus my lens on that spot so that then I can step into the frame and I know I'm in focus. After you do that though, make sure you turn off your autofocus, because the last thing you want is to spend hours shooting what you think is great footage and then to come back and find that your autofocus has latched onto something in the background. Another thing to be aware of is exposure. That just means how bright or how dark things are. Because with photography, it's a lot easier to bring things back from the shadows, but with video, it's really hard if you don't get it right in camera. So you really want to try to make sure those levels are correct in the first place. It's also really helpful to monitor your framing. I used to have this camera that had a flip out screen where I could actually see the image while I was recording, and that was great. And then I upgraded my camera, and the more professional cameras didn't have that little screen. What were they thinking? I don't know, but it made my life a lot more difficult. Now lately I've started using this old HD TV to monitor my signal with an HDMI cord, and that is helpful, but it's not as good as a more professional solution, so at some point I am going to invest in a proper video monitor. Now a lot of cameras have Wi-Fi functions where you can actually see the signal from your camera on your phone, and that works too, just as long as you have some way of seeing if everything looks more or less right. Have a shot list. It doesn't have to be a physical list, although it can be. It could be in your head. But just think through what kind of shots you know you need to get, so that when you're doing the shoot, you can move quickly and know that you're getting what you need to get. And speaking of the shot list, it's a really good idea to have more footage than you need. You can even have some B-roll, just footage of things that are not you singing, but that you can kind of splice in there with the video. A lot of the time I find that some of the shots I thought would work really are kind of boring or just don't work, or maybe I made a goofy face and I need to have something else to cut to. So it's really useful to have a variety of angles. What I try to do generally is get a wide shot, get a medium shot, and then get some shots of the instruments from different angles. That generally provides me with enough footage to work with. Alright, and with that I have my guitar, and it looks like we are ready to shoot. All I have to do now is start the music. So it's about 9:15 and I am finally done shooting. And now it is time to do my least favorite part of the process, taking all of my stuff back in. That's not going to be as much fun, but I think it's going to look really cool, and I think the lighting setup worked out pretty well, so I'm excited to see what we got. Editing could really be a subject unto itself, but I'm going to try to distill it into a few simple points. First, you need an editing program. I use Final Cut Pro, but a lot of people like Adobe Premiere. It's really about personal preference. Final Cut Pro is what I know, so it's what I use. Like I've said before, the process begins by having your audio track. Once you have your audio track, you can line up your video clips to match the audio of your song. Then it just becomes a matter of deciding which clips to use. I use the blade tool to split up the clips at the points I want them to change, and then enable or disable them to show the ones I want. Here we start with a build-up on the drums, followed by a wide shot, then a shot of the guitar, a medium shot, and a wider shot of the drums. It takes a lot of patience to go through and decide exactly where you want to make your cuts, but it's definitely worth taking the time to do it carefully. There's a lot of other things to think about, like color correction for example, but in its simplest form, editing is about arranging your footage in a way that you think is pleasing. So without any further delay, let's have a look at the final product. In closing, I know there are some people watching this that are thinking, well, that's all great for you, but I couldn't stop. Just stop right there, because you can. When I started making videos, I didn't know anything. I didn't even have a camera. I actually used the FaceTime camera on my MacBook to record my first video. And yeah, it's not 1080p, but you know, I'm glad that I did it, and I learned a lot from the experience. I am in no way an expert, and there's a lot I don't know about traditional filmmaking, But what I do have is a desire to learn and a willingness to try. And for all of you who feel like this is still overwhelming, don't worry, I'm planning a follow-up video for you, and we're going to talk about some ways you can do this super simple. If you're interested in making a video, I encourage you to just go for it. That's what I did. I didn't really have any equipment. And if you do want to go and get something, like I said, go and get a pair of those $100 soft boxes. You'll use them forever and they'll make your videos look great. You don't need a background in photography and you don't need to know anything about filmmaking. All you really need is the willingness to try and a desire to learn.